What is going on, my broskiis? My name is Toadski, back again here to bring you guys yet another One Piece Treasure Cruise video. And yes, we have a brand new Assault Rumble season coming up. Now, it's interesting though, because this is going to be like the first Assault Rumble season where like most people are not really going to be pulling for the point boosters, because all the point boosters during this season are going to be, you know, the Summon Yamato, the Summon Nami, the Ulti, and the Perona rare recruits. So if you don't own any of those rare recruits like myself, you're just not going to get any like booster points for this event. So it's going to be interesting to see how competitive it's going to be, like just knowing the fact that a lot of people are just really not going to pull for these units. So anyways, let's get into talking about this first fight, which is going to be against Monkey D. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji once again. So this has been a pretty like stock standard boss that has been out for the last couple of seasons, and the actual like resistances for this is pretty much the same in terms of they resist health cuts by a lot, they reduce action bind, they reduce let me just pull it up exactly so that I know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not sounding like an absolute fool. But instead of being Psy like what they were last season, these characters are now Dex in this season, which is interesting. So they evade Force Out, damage over time, and action bind, as well as reduce health cuts by 85%. Now, the other thing you need to be noteworthy of is that the enemies for this particular fight do additional gimmicks against driven characters. So I would advise that if you are building a team against this, do not build around driven teams at all. Now, something else to note about the Luffy fight is that he takes 20% additional damage from cerebral units and 10% additional damage against striker characters. Now, in my team composition right here, the only real character that kind of fills that role, I guess, is Kobe. I don't remember off the top of my head if the Uta is a cerebral unit. I'm pretty sure she is, but Uta doesn't really do damage. So Kobe is like the only real unit that's actually making full use of these abilities on my team. But then again, there's not many like good characters I guess you could use in this instance. But one thing to note though is just because we're up against, you know, a Dex focused team doesn't necessarily mean that Strength is always going to be the best team against it. Strength just generically are a really good team, but considering that Cerebral and Striker characters do so much additional damage, more like the Cerebral, I didn't realize that Cerebral was a 20% increase. Like, that's absolutely massive. So building a Cerebral team against this one might be the way to go. But remember, just keep in mind that if you run driven characters, then Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji will do additional gimmicks against you, and that's going to be ultimately detrimental. But all things considered, because of the sheer power that the Strength team has with Kuma, Luffy, and even honestly Kobe as well, the fact that he's Cerebral, he himself just does a ton of additional damage. It actually, like, this team did tons for me, honestly. It was pretty good. I think that Strength will just be a mainstay as it stands right now in kind of Assault Rumble meta, just because of the amount of damage that you're able to output, especially if you've got Christmas Uta and Kobe to continuously charge your specials. It just works so well. So I'll leave you guys with this clip and we'll pick things up in the secondary boss. Moving on to the secondary boss, we're going to be having Whitebeard once again. So this pretty much looks like the exact same boss that we had last season. It is a full side team against Whitebeard, Marco, and Ace. So they all pretty much do the exact same thing as last season. So nothing really too crazy or out of the blue that we weren't really expecting. One thing to note though is that if you bring fighter characters, those are the units that Whitebeard, Marco, and Ace will do additional gimmicks against. So I would avoid bringing fighter characters into this quest. But looking at what it actually does more damage against these bosses here. Against Whitebeard, int characters do 15% additional damage, and striker characters do 15% additional damage. So of course, if you run int strikers like what we predominantly do here, mainly focusing in on Jay Garcia, Saturn, as well as you know, Roger Rayleigh and Gaban, if you're just building around that, that helps you out a ton. I didn't really have that much success with the sword characters. I do think that on paper they're quite good, but unfortunately I wasn't quite able to get their special to launch as often as I would have hoped to kind of use them in the right instance, because it's all about timing, you know. They're going to provide like the most beneficial effects to you if you can launch the sword pirate special or the sword character before the enemy start launching their specials, and I found myself in a lot of situations where that just didn't happen, which did kind of suck. Now I do run S-Hawk on the team. He was just overall just a great character. Again, he's int, so he still gets a 15% damage bonus, so despite the fact he's not a striker, he still ended up being a pretty heavy lifter for the team. Now, another thing I was considering is maybe just putting like Smoker up front instead of like maybe Guild Tesoro, because of the fact that he can just potentially just special bind an opponent, and that could be huge for us. I know that Saturn can also provide some really good utility with special bind, and that does work quite well. But of course, Saturn has a very, very high cooldown, which does kind of hurt him. I was kind of hoping that Roger could get to really low threshold so that when he launches his special, he can just do like tons and tons of damage. Or ultimately, if Roger can just get knocked out so we can get his ultimate special working as well. Unfortunately for us, we didn't really get a chance to use his special below the 40% threshold, which did kind of suck. Honestly, it might have even been the fault of the sword character consistently applying that shield buff. Might be a kind of a detriment, so I might have to play around with this team a little bit more to see if there's a little bit of a better combination that can get higher points for this team. But overall, it did get the job done. And now we get to the final boss of this season, which is the new boss that they decided to put in this time around, which is a solo J. Garcia Saturn boss fight. Now this one, I'm still not 100% certain on how I want to go about this team. So in terms of what you should be keeping an eye out for, is Saturn does do additional gimmicks against strength characters. So ideally, do not bring your strength team against this, because you're going to be in for a world of hurt. And in terms of what will actually help you here, is that characters that are Dex or characters that are Revolutionary Army tag will have a 15% damage bonus each. So if you have a Dex unit that is also Rev Army, then it's like a 30% damage bonus, which is quite good. Actually, I don't know if it's an additive or a multiplicative damage bonus. Either way, you'll just be getting more damage. So they obviously want you to try and use a team surrounding Dragon, Ivankov, Kuma, like that kind of synergy. But again, no run really pulled for that unit, let's be real here. Additionally, one thing to kind of note is that all enemies will actually take an additional 10% damage against Paramecia characters and 40% damage increase against child characters, which is just absurd. So I may have to look into the child tag to see if there are actually any good Rumble characters that you could actually put on your team. I'm going to pull it up right now as I'm doing this commentary, because that just seems kind of fascinating to me. Just if there is a random child character that just does like crazy stuff. But ultimately, this boss was kind of annoying. I'm not really too sure what's going to be the best way forward for this one. Just looking at the child tag right now, there's really not a lot of good characters in this tag. You've got Otama, but she's not a damage dealing unit. The only real damage dealing unit is Kid Luffy, and Kid Luffy, he does fixed damage, which doesn't really help you out, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. They really want you to obviously use the new Yamato and Otama character. If you have that unit, they get so much additional damage because they're Paramecia and Child, so it's like 50% bonus damage. And then on one of the other fights, if you're running your striker team, they get like an additional 15%. So yeah, and then like so they're also cerebral, so you could use them on that first fight and you get like an additional 15% or 20%. Like it's just kind of absurd actually if you can run it in a very specific scenario. So I guess yeah, obviously this season is to promote the new characters. Obviously it makes sense. But again, let's be real here, no one's really going to be pulling for the monthly characters. It's more of like, if you have the boosters, yeah, it's going to make things a lot easier for you, but it will be interesting to see how the community comes up with some interesting teams to go up against some of these bosses here. But that is going to wrap it up for me for this one. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to go ahead and leave a like, and if you want to stay up to date with all the content I post, including more One Piece Treasure Cruise content, make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. On that, guys, I'll see you guys within the next video.